Welcome to Bridging the Gap, Law, Therapy, and Justice.
Welcome to Bridging the Gap, Law, Therapy, and Justice with Caitlin Burgess. I'm Caitlin Burgess, a licensed marriage and family therapist and attorney. In this show, we explore the intersection of law, therapy, and forensic practice, especially in family law cases where emotions run high and children can be deeply impacted by the conflict. Today, I am joined by Bill Eddy, licensed clinical social worker and attorney. He is the co-founder and director of innovation at the High Conflict Institute. Bill is a therapist, attorney, and mediator who has spent literally decades working in the field of high conflict divorce and developing practical approaches to help children and families manage these conflicts more effectively. Today, we're talking about how parents' high conflict emotions can spread into the family system during divorce and how that impacts children, and why emotional patterns often drive the most difficult family court cases. Welcome, Bill. It's so great to see you.
Thanks, Caitlin. I'm glad to be on. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. So, Bill, when people talk about high conflict divorce, what do you think, with all your years of experience, is really driving the conflict underneath the legal issues?
Well, I think what's really driving it is a lot of emotions that people are having a hard time managing because they're so intense during a divorce, and especially fear and anger get triggered, and it's hard for people to just manage themselves. So I like to think of it as, to some degree, a lack of self-management skills when people are under extreme stress. And so divorce puts them under extreme stress, and people just are almost unprepared for how upsetting it can be. So that emotional takeover seems to be, I think, driving the high conflict.
Interesting. So I know you focused a lot on the idea that emotions can be contagious in these cases. So can you tell me, what does it mean for emotions to be contagious in the context of legal disputes in family court?
Well, I think emotions are contagious, especially within families, so that, children grow up, their first couple years, the right hemisphere of their brain is developing rapidly, and that's the more nonverbal, emotional, unconscious brain. And that's really absorbing parents' emotions. Infants don't know how to respond to situations, and they look at their parents, and their parents are upset, and the child starts crying, or the parent's happy, and the child starts laughing. After about 2 years, the left brain starts coming online with language, more rational thought, and all of that. And as the child grows up, they're more and more able to manage their emotional responses. But they're still learning, and within families, emotions just radiate between parents and kids and back again constantly. And so I think it's that we don't understand the unconscious nature of the emotional brain, mostly the right hemisphere, and that's really what absorbs. There's the amygdala in the brain, there's what's called mirror neurons in the brain, and these are what seem to absorb and catch other people's emotions. So very much emotions are contagious, and high conflict emotions are highly contagious.
So in your experience, what do parents often miss about the impact their emotional intensity is having on their children in the moment?
Well, I think what's actually happening is they're not aware of other people when they're real upset. And so, Johnny may be standing 5 feet away in the same room, and the parent's on the phone, and something the other parent said, they're outraged. How dare you say that? And they may start yelling. They may, burst into tears. They may have all these things. They're oblivious to what's around them. And so it isn't like, I don't care if I hurt my child by giving them all these intense emotions. It's like, I'm not even aware that my child's there. And in some of our trainings and teachings, we have parents say, one of the big things I've learned is to not have those discussions when the child's in the room, because once I get in the discussion, I can't keep track of their presence. So I think it's just not being aware rather than being intentional.
Understood. So, how can these emotional dynamics start shaping a child's behavior or relationship with one or both their parents over time?
Well, what happens, since the emotions are contagious and the high conflict emotions are highly contagious, the child seems to go one of two ways. They really start mirroring the parent's emotions. So if the parent, let's say mom, the child's around mom and mom's saying, your father did it again and he's such a jerk and all this stuff and much worse, the child starts having the same experience. So they're like, now I'm intensely angry too. It must be at my father. So that it's not even a conscious awareness. And there's some research talks about right brain to right brain communication. So emotional communication to emotional reception by the child that skips logic. And one of the things that we often see is kids say, well, I don't want to ever see my father again or my mother again. And you say, why? And they don't have logical reasons. So they kind of oh, well, I don't like the way he wears his hair. Or my mother's no good at math. My dad's good at math. It's like, that's why you never want to see them again? Well, yeah, of course. And it's like the intensity of emotion influences what they think. And they start creating these stories that aren't even true about the other person negatively because they've absorbed the negative emotions. But I want to mention sometimes some kids, instead of mirroring what their parent's doing, is they absorb the emotion, but now they feel it towards that parent. So they become angry at that parent and want to get away from that parent. The emotions are too intense. They're overwhelming. And the child's like, how can I get away from this parent? Because I can't cope with the emotions. And kids don't have the mechanisms to separate their emotions from those of the people, especially their parents around them. So that's why this is so common with children.
Yes, understood. I've seen that in my own practice. And I'm wondering, what makes these patterns especially difficult for children who are already dealing with the stress of the divorce and the transitions between the two households, like in a shared custody situation?
Yeah, well, the child's having their own emotions about the divorce. They kind of lost their foundation in life because their parents were getting along. And so kids shouldn't be worrying about their parents. They should be worrying about their peers and what activities to do and, all that stuff. But when their foundation dissolves and the parents separate, they have all their own stuff. Plus, the parents now may be at war with each other if it's a high conflict situation or domestic violence or resistance, whatever's going on. And so it's like a double whammy for them. They have their own emotions and now they have the parents' emotions. And both parents, so it's a triple whammy to cope with all of this stuff happening at once. And if no one's managing themselves, the kids just can drown in these emotions.
Right. It can be so rough for the kids. And I guess the other question I have is for therapists, attorneys, and other court professionals, like just judges, mediators, whoever's involved in these cases, what are some of the signs that you've observed that a child may be carrying the emotional weight of the parental conflict?
I think, first of all, is assume that they're carrying some of the weight of the conflict. Even in a non-high conflict divorce, the kids are still distressed and trying to cope with that these two parents are at least uncomfortable with each other. Unless they're super comfortable with each other, children are going to absorb some degree of tension. So first of all, I would say assume it and try to give them some empathy. This is what I tell parents and professionals is tell the kids you have empathy for them. They're going through a hard time. And there's a lot of unpredictability. There may be a lot of hostility. And they need somebody somewhere to say, I can see how hard this is on you. And just empathizing with them, even if it's not a big discussion, to say, I can see this is hard on you. And, if there's something I can say that might help, let me know. And this is parents and professionals working with kids going through this.
Good insight. Yeah, empathy can go a long way in these situations, helping the child to feel understood. So if a parent who's listening to this right now recognizes that their own high intensity emotions are spilling onto their child, or children, what in your place is a good place to begin? Like, what would you recommend that parent do?
I think what's really good for parents to do at the time, let's say they blurted out, I just hate what the other parent did, is to then give what we call a repairing statement. And therapists are used to giving repairing statements. Let's say they were late for a session or something, and they put energy into that. Well, parents need to put energy into repairing statements for kids. And some of the research on emotions and emotional contagion is when you're telling a story, like a child's hearing your story, the peak of the story is what gets remembered, and the end of the story. So if you've blurted out something really angry, and then oh my goodness, is give a repairing statement. Say, Johnny, I just said something really awful about, let's say, your mother, and I don't really mean that. That's not really how I feel, and I want you to know that, and I want you to know you don't have to worry. I can handle myself, and you don't have to have the emotions that I have. Something like that, with that kind of tone, like a calming tone that kind of slows down near the end, that's more peaceful, can really help a child not absorb the negative emotions.
Great examples there. Thank you for those. So, Bill, it's been great to have you today and on this episode. And that's it for today's episode of Bridging the Gap, Law, Therapy, and Justice. To learn more about Caitlin Burgess, that's me, and my interdisciplinary clinical, legal, and forensic work, you can visit my website, CaitlinBurgess.com. To learn more about Bill Eddy and the High Conflict Institute, visit highconflictinstitute.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review if you found this episode helpful.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.